Now, if you ask me, one of the biggest mistakes the Star Wars sequel trilogy made was not making Anakin Skywalker part of the story, not bringing in Hayden Christensen to play a Force ghost version of him, and in some respect, continuing his story. To me, it's rather baffling that the name Anakin is never once uttered in those movies, and that a voice at the bitter end, which was actually just one voice among many, was the only quote-unquote appearance he makes in the trilogy. And honestly, after The Force Awakens, I thought or hoped this trilogy might end up being a battle between the legacies of Anakin Skywalker and Darth Vader, that somehow some sort of dark side remnant of Vader was attached to his melted helmet, and this idea was even introduced in the Aftermath trilogy of books, and it was somehow influencing Kylo Ren. While then the Force ghost of Anakin, and perhaps the other Force ghosts as well, were using Anakin's old lightsaber and one Luke had once wielded himself to try and send Rey to Luke to be trained, where, after a lifetime of fending for herself, she would need to be convinced to become a part of this, that she would need to be convinced to risk everything to try and save Ben Solo, this monster she had just witnessed not only kill his own father, but a man she had instantly admired and started to look up to. I honestly thought this trilogy might be a battle via proxy between Darth Vader and Anakin Skywalker. Instead, nothing of that sort happened. Luke was actually the one who needed to be convinced to get back into the fight, needed to be convinced by Rey that his nephew could be saved. And again, Anakin was in no way, shape, or form part of this story, outside of Kylo's on-again and off-again obsession with his alter ego Darth Vader, but it was never any sort of remnant of Vader encouraging this, it was just Palpatine the whole time. And many seem to think or believe that the reason Anakin wasn't part of the story, why he wasn't really in the sequels, was because Disney and Lucasfilm were afraid to include him because of a large aversion to the prequels from fans and the general audience alike. They were operating under the assumption that almost everyone hates the prequels, and were more worried that including Anakin, played by Hayden, would hurt them at the box office than they were concerned about just trying to tell the best possible Star Wars story to complete the Skywalker saga in the best possible way, which I think most would agree would include involving Anakin to some degree in the sequels, or having him be more than just a single voice at the end of the whole thing. And sure, to be fair here, there were a lot of people who, back in the day especially, didn't like the prequels so much, though I almost find it ironic that I often hear people say they appreciate the prequels more these days because of how bad the sequels were. But anyway, yes, there were and still is hate for the prequels, but what Disney and Lucasfilm failed to realize is, for one, the power of the generation that grew up with the prequels in the fandom is very prominent these days, and that a lot of people who grew up with the original trilogy, myself included, never had a problem with the prequels, that we always saw them as part of the story. They also didn't see, or maybe didn't care, that the sequels were an opportunity to unite all generations of Star Wars fans while creating a brand new one in the process. If the sequels had embraced both the prequels and the original trilogy, instead of ignoring one and trying to retell the story of the other, all the while tearing down some of its characters, they could have made something every fan wanted to get behind. They could have united the fan base instead of splitting it wider than it's ever been split before. But perhaps Disney and Lucasfilm have learned from their mistakes, because there are rumors out there that Hayden Christensen will be in the upcoming Obi-Wan Kenobi series, and that he won't just be making a cameo or two, but that'll be a reoccurring character. And though I was already super excited for this series, this news or possibility makes me even more so, because not only could this be a way to bring fans of the prequels and original trilogy, not to mention the Clone Wars, together by giving us a series that bridges the gap between old Obi-Wan and young Obi-Wan, but this could further explore one of the greatest, most important relationships in Star Wars, the one between Anakin and Obi-Wan. This could build even further off what we saw in the Clone Wars animated series between the two, and it could also begin to explain how Obi-Wan was ultimately able to let go of his mistakes and guilt, how he was able to become a Force ghost upon his death, because in order to become one, as we learned in Clone Wars, you must let go of all fear and attachment. And a lot of Obi-Wan coping with the past and letting go of all his anger and attachment could be done via flashback. That again takes us to the Clone Wars, and considering technology these days, it wouldn't be all that hard to de-age them and make Obi-Wan and Anakin look like they did when they were younger. There's also, of course, the possibility that Obi-Wan, after years of being alone in the desert and being out in the sun way too long, is starting to see or envision Anakin as he once was, and maybe the vision of Anakin helps Obi-Wan find his way once more. That could even tie into what Obi-Wan tells Luke in A New Hope, that when Anakin became Darth Vader, the good man who was his father was destroyed. It could tie into the whole certain point of view thing, explain why Obi-Wan truly sees them as two different people, because it was these visions of his old friend that somehow allowed him to cope and move past what had happened to him. It could also explain why Obi-Wan doesn't think Anakin can be saved, because he believes there was some sort of actual separation of the two, that Vader is a manifestation of the dark side, and that Anakin is truly dead. Another possibility here is they could put Hayden Christensen back in the suit to play Darth Vader, as he did at the end of Revenge of the Sith. And as I've suggested before, this series could partly be about Darth Vader's hunt for Kenobi. We even see in Rebels that, no surprise, after all these years, Vader is still very much looking for and wanting to find his old master. So perhaps, thanks somehow to the master and apprentice bond, Vader is still able to reach out to Obi-Wan and appears to him as Anakin, though that might not line up well with their conversation in A New Hope, where it really doesn't seem like they've had any sort of contact with each other since Mustafar. However, if they did want to get bold here, they could play around with that line from Vader in A New Hope when Obi-Wan is sneaking around the Death Star and he senses him, where he says he feels a presence that he's not felt since, and then he doesn't finish. They could construe this to mean he hasn't felt him since he used to visit him looking as Anakin, or something along those lines. Either way here, there are so many ways or opportunities to bring Hayden Christensen back into the mix here, and to bring Anakin Skywalker back into the story. And since one of the main themes of Star Wars is redemption, I would love to see Hayden get a shot at playing this character again, because he's taken a lot of heat over the years for his portrayal of Anakin Skywalker, when, if we're being honest, a lot of it likely had to do with the direction given to him by George Lucas, though you can certainly also make the argument that some of the lines and his delivery, especially in Episode 2, is pretty much how a teenager flirting with a girl for the first time would sound. All I know is if this series is done right, it could be the ultimate bridge. It could do what the sequels failed to do, bring all generations of Star Wars fans together, and unite them behind one fantastic story that borrows from all eras and all the eras they love. And I really hope Disney and Lucasfilm and or Joby Harold, who's writing this, and Deborah Chow, who will be directing it, truly realize the potential here, and don't turn this into something cheesy and meaningless. Because originally reports suggested this show was mainly going to be about how Obi-Wan played a part in protecting young Luke, and maybe even protecting young Leia, however that would work. But since then, the original writer was let go, and I'd imagine those scripts were discarded along with him. Because going off what we see in A New Hope, I don't really get the impression Obi-Wan was once a mentor-like figure to Luke. I don't get the impression there was much interaction between them over the years. In fact, in the new Star Wars comics, we learned Owen was actively trying to keep Obi-Wan away from Luke, that he never wanted to see Luke get trained, and that he blamed Obi-Wan for what happened to Anakin, however he knew what happened to Anakin. Though something tells me they're not actually going to try too hard to keep to what was established in those few issues of comics. Something tells me those will get ignored if need be. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think. Would you like to see Anakin Skywalker played by Hayden Christensen in the upcoming Obi-Wan series? Do you think this could be a sort of redemption for him? Whatever the case may be, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.